Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished marketer from Cape Town, South Africa, Mr. Jonty Fisher. Jonty, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ashutosh. Great to be here.
Thank you. Jonty is the Senior Vice President of the Publicis Groupe in Africa. He has led strategic thinking and guided executional work across brands such as Heineken, Mondelez, PepsiCo, Jack Daniels, Adidas Originals, KIA Motors, Hennessy, Prudential, and many more. So, Jonty, before we talk branding and business marketing, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Sure. I suppose I was never cut out for a normal corporate life until now, I suppose, 20 years later. But I studied a business degree at the University of Cape Town, and I think that degree was very much focused on pushing us as graduates into Procter & Gamble or Unilever or one of the large FMCG brands, and that just never really was where I wanted to go at the time. So in my honors year, we were writing a thesis, so you only have, say, an hour or two of lectures in the day. I started an advertising agency with a friend. And then actually, when I graduated, we turned that into a proper agency. And that was, 21, 22 years of running my own agencies and merging and selling and doing all sorts of different things. And then, about 4 years ago, actually, just as COVID hit, I joined Publicis in this role. Which was an amazing challenge, actually, as a leader to come in the middle of COVID when everyone was remote for quite a long time. It had its own challenges, but that's really my history. So running independent agencies for 20 years, and then within the big behemoth of Publicis thereafter.
Very well, sir. Thank you. And therefore, let's talk about branding and business marketing strategy. What, in your view, are some of the most common mistakes brands make in their marketing strategies?
I think there's a couple. I think from a most basic level, I think that very often brands are still can often mistake measurement for impact. In the early days of digital, I think attribution modeling placed a huge amount more value on bottom funnel or last mile activity, last click attribution, that type of thing, because it was much easier to measure, which generally meant that brands tended to overweight their spend there. But certainly we know from so much research, like all the Burnett and Fields work as an example, that brand is such a critical component of long-term sales growth, and underspending in brand leads to longer-term sales challenges. And I think this is instinctively intuitive. I think if we know that we've got to bring more consumers into strong brand awareness to ensure that, when a consumer has our brand in their consideration set of options when they're in market for our brand's offering. If not, it's so difficult to time our way into the mental availability that's required at the moment that they make a buying decision. I think another one from an agency perspective is certainly not connecting media and creative. We very much live in a media-led world these days, and I think brands and agencies should always be connecting media and creative from start to finish, where strategy and conceptualization happens together. What this allows us to do is to maximize the use of data upfront to build more resonant campaigns, but also, probably more importantly, to maximize the creative opportunities at every touch point on every single platform. I think that's really important. And then I think from a campaign planning point of view, the third one I'd say is that I think both clients and agencies are guilty of changing creative too often. Clients and agencies generally get bored of campaign work before consumers do. And they tend to want to change good performing work before it really reaches wear out. And maybe one more, I'd say, I think it's really important that we think about brand plans and how we are building out our brand strategies in a very connected consumer way. I think very often we tend to think of these things as being quite modular, broken down by either by channel or by touch points, but that's not really how people shop and how people go through a purchase cycle. So
Right.
I think the separation of brand and sales activation, as an example, to different teams, different budgets, it really hampers that connected customer view. And what digital has allowed us to do is given us the ability to way more easily gain first-party consumer data and to use that data to actually engage with consumers and move them into our own direct platforms. So whether that's in CRM, whether that's digital or physical experiences or your own .com platforms, really what we want is to be able to extend our customer conversations away from where we're having to repeatedly pay, the big platform businesses, Meta, Google, etc., to
Right.
reach our own customers and rather be able to move them into our own platforms. And
Mm.
I think that's one of the major opportunities that digital and I suppose the plethora of AI tools that allow us
Yeah.
to manage data in new ways, what that gives us the opportunity to do. But I think too often brands are actually hampered by their own internal operational structures and their financial structures to be able to leverage that. But I think that's something that I think modern marketing gets wrong more than it gets right. So
Well
there's a
said.
journey there.
Well said. But when you look back at your own journey, and as an entrepreneur running your own agencies for 2 decades, and now as a senior leader in Publicis, how have you seen technology changing this brand engagement that you are driving for customers? And what is the role of social media?
Mm. Sure. I mean, it's such a broad question because it's had such a huge impact. I mean, I think it's very hard to see an area of modern marketing that doesn't have technology as its base these days. Whether that's from media planning, whether that's reporting system, whether that's marketing automation that's delivering all of the kind of complex CRM campaigns, and more recently to these kind of very large AI-driven production rendering platforms. I mean, all of those have technology as their base. But I think if we're talking specifically about brand engagement, probably the biggest area has been in digital business transformation with a marketing lens. And I think, on our continent, in Africa, mobile really is king, and the ability to use digital to help shoppers to get to the right product information, to enhance customer service through WhatsApp bots and the like, to be able to bring more people into basic e-commerce on mobile phones through apps, and even to, using the simplicity of something like USSD on mobile to manage simple purchases with very, very low data.
Mm.
All of these, I think, are examples of how technology has allowed brands to engage with consumers more on their terms, the way that they shop, the way that they engage through mobile channels. So
Mm.
I think certainly technology plays an absolutely fundamental role now. I think when it comes to social, social has got such again, with us being mobile first, the primary interaction being the mobile phone, I think social obviously plays a hugely important role in brand strategy. Influencer marketing has grown massively on our continent,
Correct.
and celebrities and influencers are still a really, or are a primary route to really driving kind of brand fame
Mm.
across Africa. So, but I think what we need to be doing is thinking about how digital experiences can connect that fame driving big brand work that we might be doing through more above the line channels,
Mhm.
and work that's out there in the physical world, and really use social to pull into digital funnels that can use digital media, digital experiences to move people from that kind of brand affinity space
Mhm.
into the last mile at the retail shelf. 95% of product sales across Africa are still physical.
Right.
And while e-commerce is growing rapidly, and Amazon is just launched in South Africa, and I'm sure in other key markets to follow soon, this will continue to grow. So social commerce is still in its infancy here in comparison to many first world markets, but increasingly it's just so important of how we connect and use social to connect to the actual retail shelf, using digital experiences that we can drive through social into other digital platforms that can really lead consumers to that retail shelf. That's I
Yes.
think the pathway that technology gives us on the African continent specifically.
Well said. And a few minutes back, Jonty, you spoke about artificial intelligence, and my question to you is, how do you see AI changing the landscape of marketing, advertising, and the people who are there in advertising?
Yeah, look, certainly it's a question that everybody's pondering over at the moment, and it's just moving so fast. And I think we as an industry have been quite guilty in the past of magpieing, when it comes to new technologies,
Mm,
overhyping things like NFTs and metaverse. But certainly I don't believe that AI falls into this category, and I can
mm,
tell you that certainly Publicis doesn't either. Publicis is investing about 300 million euros over the next 3 years to completely overhaul our operating system of as a business of how we function, from production to creative services to media to the actual operations function itself,
mm,
to completely reimagine how we use AI across all of our functional areas to deliver smarter, faster, more agile solutions to our
mm,
clients.
mm,
I mean, it's undoubtedly going to have a absolutely massive impact on the industry. I think, if we start with production already, that's where AI has probably had the most fundamental leaps in terms of how we're using AI in the rendering of creative products and mass rendering of especially digital assets. The ability to render out thousands of different assets in different
mm,
sizes.
mm,
Um, and to plug them into kind of mass media campaigns is a huge way we're using AI at the moment.
mm,
Media, it's definitely revolutionizing already how we can personalize content, and really wrap targeted advertising around consumers. And that's really by crunching huge swathes of data to uncover these relevant audiences and then serving personalized content and ads to that audience.
mm.
Even things like data analysis and reporting and a simple repetitive task, all of that will be AI driven, and already to a large degree is getting there.
Right.
The interesting parts obviously are more where conceptual creativity and strategic thinking come in. And I think certainly the rollout of campaigns, once a core idea is being developed
Mm,
and we're looking at how to roll that campaign out through various channels and structures,
mm,
AI is going to play a fundamental role there in managing a lot of that rollout. And already
right.
we've got a lot of systems that are doing that, but I think that's only going to increase over time.
Mm,
And then, already we're using AI so much to give us a base, whether it's in long form content creation, it just gives you such a strong base to be able to work off. And even in content curation, being able to distill lots of information into even some of the most obvious platforms. You often, to get to the best thinking, you've got to get a lot of the obvious stuff out the way,
mm,
and ChatGPT and the like can really get you there so much faster,
mm.
which is incredibly helpful to strategists and creators and content marketers.
Yeah.
I suppose I think the caution, I suppose, and certainly where some of our clients are very cautious around AI is the legislative framework and the legal framework around it. So from an IP, intellectual property point of view, I mean the legal frameworks haven't really caught up to AI yet. It's just moving so fast, and it's moving so far ahead of the legal IP frameworks that
Mm,
some of our clients, some of our largest clients, actually don't allow us to use AI in any content generation that will be out there in the wild.
mm,
But I think even as an industry, our caution is, I suppose we love to call AI generative, but it's
mm,
still, by definition, derivative just off a really massive base. So
mm,
the ability for us to now pump out huge amounts of assets, huge amount of content that is just gonna, continue to flood certainly our digital media. I think the worry is that we move into kind of a sea of sameness, as that derivation pushes us all into similar spaces, that we end up in a bit of a sea of sameness of automated content. So, but we certainly believe, therefore, that original creativity, original thinking, original creativity will still have a huge value, because sticking out in a distinctive way is going to add greater impact to any kind of media spend. But I think the key is then how we use that further down funnel, downstream, in terms of once that creative thinking, that strategic thinking is done, how are we using AI to then deliver the rollout of those assets? So I suppose I've spoken a lot about it because I think,
That's a
we
great
do see
response.
this as a really fundamental change.
Great response. So now let me shift gears and ask you from a consumer perspective. I'm from the boomers generation. You're younger, yet we've had the millennials. Now we've got the Gen Zs, and now we've got Gen Alpha coming in. All alphabets from the alphabet soup are now markets for you people as advertisers, marketers. What are some of the biggest challenges, Jonty, in your opinion, that brands face in maintaining relevance with so many differently segmented customers?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the key challenges. I think, this fragmentation of media and fragmentation of platforms, and especially I think most importantly, what social specifically has done is almost led to this hyper specialization of interests and passion points.
Yeah.
That thin slices these so much, and it does make really grabbing consumer attention a really, really difficult thing these days. The days where you could buy 1,000 spots on TV, radio, and out of home and reach 80% of your consumers are long gone. I think today's all consumers, but specifically youngsters, watch, they browse, they shop, they interact when and how they want. Whether that's in store or online, whether that's on a mobile phone or a tablet or a computer or whatever, that path to conversion is just increasingly more convoluted. So finding them at scale is really tough, and that is all about resonance, because marketers now actually have to be experts in these niche communities now, all these thin slice communities, to be able to get that attention and to try and convince them to buy their products, because those mass attention platforms are, as you say, continually being thin sliced. I think another thing that makes this really difficult has been this, in a similar way, this kind of how quickly the cultural codes are shifting. I think it's always been true of younger generations that are obviously looking at creating points of difference from older generations.
Correct.
But it does feel that social media has kind of put this on absolute hyperspeed. The speed of dissemination of a new fashion or a new meme or a new catchphrase is so fast that those cultural codes are often quite fleeting. By the time a brand wants to latch onto one of those, it's already moved on. And I think this means that brands have got to be more cautious about the surface cultural expressions, and really tap into the passion point itself, and to try and find more cultural touch points that are deeper, that have more longevity. But that takes a specific amount of understanding and research, and really being incredibly close to those customers. So this ability to understand niche audiences, with depth is very difficult. But again, tools like AI that can do a lot of that machine learning for us are again really important in things like this.
Correct.
And I would say the last thing around, especially younger consumers, I think this kind of algorithmic world that we live in now, if you think about how Amazon, how Netflix or Instagram, how that algorithm wraps content around your specific preferences and your specific engagement. This younger generation, I mean, everybody does, I suppose, but particularly this younger generation, I think, really do expect brands to be able to personalize their experience, personalize that based on their knowledge of me as a user, or a younger person even more, as I said. So I think personalization is such a key want of these younger consumers, but it's a really difficult thing to deliver easily for lots of reasons.
Great response. Thank you. The other aspect that I've often seen with the young consumers is that they are looking at sustainability as an important factor in every brand. My question is, how has the importance of sustainability impacted branding strategies in recent years?
Yeah, so it has absolutely forced a huge amount of reconsideration of marketing efforts. I think both on the brand side and the agency side. I think, for brands, generally they've got a lot of corporate programs that they're doing, company-wide initiatives that might be CSR projects around recycling or whatever. But I think marketers specifically have had to really rethink their product and innovation pipelines and their plans. Different packaging with different substrates obviously comes with very different cost structures, and that impacts everything that you're doing in terms of your product selection and your entire innovation dynamics of whether you can introduce new variants that have non-renewable components, as an example. But I think even from tactical planning, brands have got to consider carbon footprints when they are running a promotion, even as a simple example, where winners, are going to visit an event somewhere or visit a destination that requires travel. They've got to be thinking about, well, what signal are we sending about our sustainability credibility if somebody's got to fly over a long distance to go somewhere? So I think there's so many considerations that brands have got to have, and I think we obviously have that push down to us as agencies as well. That means that how we are answering briefs has got to be very considerate around sustainability elements. Even basic things like where we choose to do a production shoot. We've got to be thinking about what our travel scenarios are like there. Is a client coming in from overseas? Can we do that in a virtual methodology? And so much, one of the gifts of COVID, I suppose, was really rapidly upskilling the entire industry in doing things like virtual shoots, where clients can be in their office but can be present on a shoot and guiding things, not having to travel. And then, even again, if I stay with production, I think there's questions and pressure on the production agencies around, how are we recycling products that are being used in shoots, even down to that level. I think there's a real understanding of sustainability, of it, embedded into the very fabric of what we're doing. So some of that you could argue, well, how much impact does something like that have? But it's more, I think, a testament to the fact that sustainability is something that our industry is having to take really seriously because of marketing, and brands being the forefront of the company's the public face of the company. I think it has been incredibly important. So I do think that our industry has really embraced sustainability, and that's changed a lot of brand strategy for the better.
Well said. So I have time for one more question. I wanted to ask you, can you share an example where you transformed a brand's identity to meet evolving demands from the market, on the consumer, of course?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and I couldn't, and it's slightly different from your question, but I just thought it was an interesting example. Vodacom is one of the biggest brands that we have in our business. We don't manage the above the line kind of brand work for them. We actually manage a lot of their field force work. And much of airtime is sold by street vendors in Africa, and we manage a very large field force for Vodacom as Publicis. And if you can imagine what COVID did to that team, and that route to market obviously was completely shut down. If people couldn't be in the streets, and we had quite a tough lockdown in South Africa. And I think what this team did incredibly well, both the client and the agency worked together to actually take, hundreds and hundreds of people that were affected by this, and pivoted and retrained all of those people to be call center agents and to switch to digital tools to be able to change the route to market from physical to telephonic and digital. So we could actually pivot that entire route to market in a matter of weeks to adapt to this kind of new world of COVID, which worked incredibly well for the client. And obviously we were able to save the majority of that team as well. A country like ours, which has got an unacceptably high unemployment rate. So I thought it's slightly different from your question, but it just kind of made
but
me
this is an amazing story.
that.
But thank you for sharing it. And on that note, Jonty, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey. How fascinating your journey has been and I'm sure my viewers and listeners will love it. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about branding, digital in the area of branding, customer segmentation, millennials, Gen Zs, and all the other members that will come in the alphabet soup. Thank you also for speaking to me about some interesting stories about how you have supported so many brands around the world. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.